but I'll just be taking notes here, I think.
Okay, sure, yeah, I'd be.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
I'm supposed to do that.
Give that to you.
So how long ago were you in Whitehorse? Pardon? How long ago were you living in Whitehorse?
Oh, I moved down to Victoria in fall of 2021.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have some connections there? We were talking about.
Yeah, Eric Epstein.
Do you want
Yes.
one?
No, it's extra for whoever.
Oh, okay. You have one?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so we just had, my brother was years and years ago, the two of them were living together in the active school for 15. And so I met Eric. Well, I knew him before, I didn't even know him.
Yeah.
Just in passing, and then years later I saw him on Whitehorse when his up there.
Hi, how are you?
What did you do?
I worked in a bunch of stuff, but
I've got, yeah.
There's only a few.
Ministry of Health and Housing Planning legislation. And I trained after 16 years in Paps County.
Okay.
And then as a medical expert.
Oh, yeah.
And I worked on
Okay.
because I had some administrative background and I was a PhD negotiation for the government.
Oh, interesting. That's pretty diverse career, Steve.
Yeah, always in the public sector.
Yeah.
Typically, trying to keep the system intact.
Good. Not an easy job sometimes.
Yeah. Interesting stuff for sure. I should. We just wait till a couple other people come, the mayor and the council. I leave the person forgets. That's what you're talking about. Always forget pen of paper, forget something.
Well, now it's time to change coats and stuff, so we got
Yeah,
keys.
I mean, the weather.
Yeah.
Finally spring yesterday. Feels like.
and you said hello to Catherine?
Yeah.
The pillar?
Yes. Yeah.
And Shelley,
Hi.
Steve Roddick.
I was.
Oh yeah, you met
Yeah,
Councilor Shelley on.
I wasn't that then, but I was here.
Yeah, one of three people I think that were in the audience.
Yes, it was.
Retrace is on her way, but she said to start.
Hello.
Okay, she should
Good to see you.
Sherry.
Okay, thank you.
Steve Roddick.
This, the nice one, go for your search.
Hi, Sherry. So you met? Yeah. You were at the beginning of it. So good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order of the Special Environment and Natural Areas Committee for Tuesday, April 25th. We'll be joined by the mayor shortly, and she's asked us to proceed. She's on her way. And just given the time frame that we've got, we'll jump in. I might just ask anyone who's got a cell phone to turn it off now, so that we turn the sound off, so it doesn't disturb. And I just want to acknowledge that we're here gathered today on the territories of the Coast Salish people and our near neighbors, Shanna First Nation, who the coastal Salish people have been stewardship of these lands for a long time. And today we'll be talking about our best efforts in stewardship with regard to the climate. We have an agenda before us, and I wonder if that meets everyone's approval. We're happy with that. Seeing no objections, we will adopt the agenda as it is. And we wanted to, we've got a guest today, Steve Roddick from Pinna Sustainability, Pinna Sustainability has been retained to help the district prepare a climate plan. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
So we opened public participation. Today's meeting is intended to be a workshop between Steve Roddick from Pinna Consulting and the council. But as everyone knows, we have public participation before every meeting. I hope we'll dedicate most of our time today to Steve and the council. But did anyone want to say anything before we begin? This evening we're going to have meeting of the MEASC, the regular meeting, but we're going to spend the entire 7 to 9 p.m. With public input on the climate plan and ideas, and we'll provide all that input to Pinna Sustainability to help in terms of building a plan. So seeing no public participation, maybe we'll just start in then. We've been around the table to meet people, and I just want to say thanks to our planners, Catherine Zishan and Steve Roddick, who've been working on the climate plan for us. And Steve, you gave a workshop to the previous council, and I guess you're pretty far along with your work when we arrived on the scene, the new council, and very much appreciate the work that you've done, making some adjustments and moving and adding the adaptation piece to it. Maybe I'll just hand over to you.
Great. I'll just stand by this microphone. Is that good? Yeah.
I'm actually going to switch here. So
Please, yeah, make yourself comfortable. And I feel bad for the rest of the audience and the council at the same time, but I'll
That's okay.
get into things here. So thanks very much for having me. It's great to be back in council chambers here in Metchosin. Today I'm going to talk a bit about the work that we've done, giving an overall summary of the work to date on the Climate Action Plan for Metchosin, and then more recent work focusing in on some priority preliminary areas of action. So I'm Steve Roddick. I'm with Pinna Sustainability, and glad to be joining Mayor and Council, members of staff, and many guests here. So thanks very much for taking your time on this beautiful day to come up to this. Today, our agenda, we're going to go through a brief overview of the workshop now. We'll be kind of starting off by discussing the process to develop the Climate Action Plan, some important context, introducing preliminary areas of action. We will be focusing largely on climate change adaptation and impacts, but we will be also discussing climate change mitigation and greenhouse gases a little bit as well. We'll take a quick health break in the middle, and then when we come back after that, we'll do a facilitated discussion going through some preliminary areas of action. We've got a few kind of themes and then some specific opportunities that we want to discuss and get some feedback from council on. And then we'll conclude by reviewing next steps and where we go from here. So thinking about the climate action planning process, some of the context that we're working within here, this project began last June. We had a council workshop in the previous fall. Many of you were here, or several of you were here at that event. We did an online community survey this winter or early spring, and now we're here with our second council workshop, and there's also a MEASC meeting this evening, which there will be an additional opportunity to collect public comment and additional feedback. Then we plan to bring this information together into a draft climate action plan to council in June, pending, I think, the date to be confirmed, but we'll plan to bring that forward in the next few weeks, and then that will lead to the completion of the 2023 Climate Action Plan for Metchosin. And just want to note too, this is not the end of the process. There's always additional information that emerges about climate change as you dig into some specific understandings of the impacts for your area, new ways of coping with those impacts, identify particular action areas that make sense as funding comes along in particular. There'll be opportunity to review, evaluate, and update the plan on an ongoing basis. So starting off, zooming out a little bit to think about the two areas of action broadly that we look at in this plan: mitigation, which was the original focus of this climate action plan, opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, avoiding the unmanageable, you could say, and then adaptation, the identification of climate risks and preparing for those risks, so managing the unavoidable. And this adaptation area includes an expanded sphere of actions and analysis for this component of the CAP. And in the middle where they overlap is an area that we call low carbon resilience, where you have an opportunity to both reduce emissions and prepare or respond to the impacts of climate change. To kind of set the stage in terms of the federal and provincial policy context, there are a number of large-scale strategies in place. Federally, the Healthy Environment and Healthy Economy strategy and then the national adaptation strategy are the two big documents. They do a lot of things, but one of the big things they do is allocate funding. And there's funding for adaptation for local government climate action. It is channeled through particular organizations like the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They also take significant action, both the federal plans and the provincial plans, the Clean BC plan and the Climate Preparedness and Adaptation Strategy. When you think about what types of actions are within Metchosin's sphere of influence, transportation is a challenging one, and building codes and efficiency standards are another challenging one. But a lot of the actions happening federally and provincially will start to carve away at those areas of emissions. And then there are also provincial actions happening with respect to adaptation, particularly with respect to community resilience and disaster risk reduction. And there is some local work already underway here, I understand, in those areas. Thinking about the regional and rural context in particular, recognizing that this is a rural and agriculture area, what are the particular considerations you want to take into account as we develop this climate action plan? So thinking about the CRD, the Regional Climate Action Strategy, what actions and impacts were identified in that strategy. Looking at neighboring jurisdictions such as Highlands, their district climate action plan, and work that's been underway in Colwood. They have a draft low carbon resilience climate action plan, and SOOC is developing a 2030 climate action plan expected later this year as well. Also, just thinking more broadly about the rural context, what are some of the best practices and case studies that are out there? What are other comparable communities doing? What are some of the lessons learned? What are some of the context that might be more applicable to a district such as Metchosin? So there's an abundance of work happening in different communities across Canada and the world. So trying to think about what are some of the best practices we can learn from those areas. Stepping into mitigation before we get into some of the climate impacts and adaptation pieces, just to note that from 2007 to 2020, Metchosin did lead in carbon emission reductions amongst the CRD districts. Granted, it is in a context in which there is less growth. That is part of the context to think about as well. But just to note that that's important. That is worth noting there. And then also that there is a carbon sequestration component that has come up in a number of discussions and a lot of interest around protecting forests, protecting ecosystems, that is not actually included in this emissions calculation as well. And just to give a snapshot of Metchosin's carbon inventory for 2020, the largest component being transportation, buildings, and there's solid waste. There's a number of other components there as well. But there's also this, I think I can use the laser pointer, this land use emissions piece at the bottom there as well, which is a significant component of the annual emissions reductions there that are sequestered. So thinking about that, we have taken the broader policy context that's happening provincially and federally to project emissions forward. Again, rough estimate, things change, the situation evolves, but looking now what we would project based on some of the significant federal and provincial policy actions like the BC Low Carbon Fuel Standard, Zero Emissions Vehicle Standard, BC Building Code, there would be an anticipated reduction in transportation-related emissions, building-related emissions. So this is the business as usual snapshot for Metchosin. So if little to no action were taken, we estimate that there'd be around a 32% reduction in emissions by 2030 from 2007 levels, and then by 2050, looking at about 61% there. When you think about climate mitigation targets, greenhouse gas reduction targets, you can look at some of your comparable jurisdictions. Provincially, BC has set a 40% by 2030 target, and the 2050 target is carbon neutral for the province as well. You look at some neighboring municipalities and districts, Colwood, 30% target by 2030, 50% per capita. SOOC is looking at a 50% by 2030 target. Highlands has set a carbon neutral target by 2030. For 2050, Colwood has a net zero target, as does SOOC. Again, those have not been finalized in those plans yet. North Cowichan is one that's not in the immediate area, but wanted to include that as they have not set a net zero target. They've set theirs at about 80%. So thinking about what that could mean for the district, what is an appropriate target to set? What's being proposed in this plan is a -40 by 2030 target and a net zero by 2050 target to align with the province, to align with several neighboring jurisdictions. But there is, some key considerations there. In the short term, there is some uncertainty around the feasibility of short-term solutions to reduce emissions in some particular areas. Also just recognizing that the district has limited capacity and is reliant on a lot of external resources and support to be able to achieve emissions reduction in buildings and transportation, for example. And then another thing is the importance of demonstrating ambition. These considerations have come into play for other jurisdictions. Balancing ambition and realism is a challenge for many municipalities and governments across the country. But what's being proposed is 40% by 2030, net zero by 2050, and then we've just highlighted what could be a potential range here, 35 to 40% by 2030, just acknowledging that business as usual estimates would be 32%, so that's not too much of a stretch from there, but then 2050, 80% to 100%. That's several decades from now, but that's obviously a significant achievement that would be required to get there. And other governments are setting their targets, at net zero or at carbon neutral. And I wanted to just take this opportunity to have a brief conversation about target setting and just open the floor to Mayor and Council to see if you have any thoughts on this or what you take away from these key considerations, or if you have any comments you'd like to make on this. And Steve, Councillor Gray, you're the chair.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like me to facilitate the go around, or would you like to do that, or what would be best for you?
I'm happy if you want to continue.
Great.
And then maybe I'll start. I would say, I think that the issue here for me is or what I'm understanding you to say is that the target you're recommending would fit with the provincial government drive in terms of the things that they're doing. And is it possible for us to do better than that? I'm not sure. Because these are overarching policies that are going to attract the population attention.
Anyone else have a comment?
I have some thoughts, but they're ill-formed. I think we should set a target, and I think it should be ambitious, realistic, and I don't know quite how to describe when the federal government sets targets and they seem to get increasingly more ambitious, but they're just not being met. So I'd hate to kind of put us in a boat where we're doing something that's just simply for show or virtue signaling in a way. But the other thing that I wonder about is, given that we're not a big city, so we don't have high rises, we don't have a transportation sort of fleet that we're dealing with, or not a very sizable one anyways. We don't have we have people leaving the district to go to work, but we're not managing big roadways. So I'm kind of cautious about where we put our time and effort in that respect. But on the flip side, the thing that we have that's really significant to the broader region is our forests and our farmland. So I would hate to see us put in a lot of, and again, I don't know the equation for this, but a lot of time and energy in terms of reducing emissions around transportation, when we maybe would be better serving the broader good by putting that attention into, again, farming, agricultural strategies, and forest protection, groundwater protection, stuff like that. So, and I don't know what the equation is, but that's kind of what comes to mind right now.
Great. Thank you.
And the one thing that I'm wrestling with is we are inherently going to be a driving community. and we're considering active transportation plans or ambitions. And that might bring biking along, like other electric bikes and all that. But I'm sensing that we will always be a driving community, and hopefully more of that can be done through electric cars. But I don't think we'll ever shape the fact that we need cars, as in we can't easily be the 15-minute city here. So that's, yeah, just some random thoughts I throw. So.
Thank you.
Mary Little's joined us, by the way.
Yeah, hi, I met you last summer. Sorry I was late.
Yes.
I was just, I was just at a regional transit meeting. I'm a director on the board, and we were having very similar conversations about where we're going in the future. And as I understand from your presentation last year and your presentation, or what I've heard of it today, we've got some decisions to make regarding how we're going to address climate action through transportation, land use. In the transportation, I agree that in the short term we are very car dependent, but I also think we need to put more effort into our active transportation plan, or our transportation plan in general, as Councillor Epp has spoken to previously. So that transportation plan will include active, and that gets us involved in our roadside trails and our safe passage within the community and to the broader communities. Yeah, I'd like to be bold and ambitious, and I hear you on that, but I also want to be practical. Usually they tell politicians under promise and over deliver, but I think it's important for us to put our politicians' hat aside and talk about what we really need. And I think we do need to be bold, but we also need to be realistic in what we can do. So I'm struggling with all this as well. What we can boldly achieve, and what we can set targets that are achievable, and not just grasp at the low-hanging fruit that won't make that much difference in the long run. But I agree with what we can do and what we have in Metchosin that we don't have in other parts of the Capital Regional District, are the farmlands and the hedgerows, and we've got to, as we've been talking, protect the Sailor Sea, and those are the kinds of things that I think Metchosin can do and do well. I'm not doom and gloom. I'm just saying I want to be practical about how we set our targets and where we move.
Thank you, Mayor.
Well, kind of along the same lines is a kind of question that the targets up there are really realistic in our community, given the transportation issues here. Even if we have vastly improved bus service, a lot of us live a long way from a bus stop. So, and the community does have a predominance, maybe 25 or 35% of people who are in the senior category, and aren't as likely. We're not healthy and all that, but aren't as likely to be walking or biking in poor weather, or in any weather, but mostly we have a lot of rain and in winter and stuff. I'm just worried about it being realistic, and as far as a lot of us will probably never be able to afford an electric car unless we win the lottery. So I just want to keep our targets realistic.
Thank you. Do you have any comments to add?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone is saying. Oh, sorry. Okay. That would be like Jay and just load it in. So I come more from the farming perspective of things, and we do have a vast amount of forest and some farmlands here. I know the bigger farms, with the exception of maybe one who's doing crop, not cover crops, but grain type crops. Most of them are very cognizant of water conservation. It's not a lot of overhead watering, and enhancing the ground to be able to keep that moisture in as well. Unfortunately, we still are working with machinery that requires fossil fuels. There's not a lot of machinery that is electric that can do the heavy work that is required on farmland or hauling livestock, that sort of thing. So that's where it's the opposite of what we're trying to achieve here, but it is our reality. Certainly we do have the roadside trails. This is great. I know myself, I've been looking at electric bikes just even the last week at some different conventions and stuff. So it'd be great for us to move forward on our action plan. I think there's great promise there, but whether or not it makes a significant change on the chart, I really don't know. But it's all about awareness. And we have talked preliminary about some alternative energy for even some of our buildings with solar panels, that sort of thing. I'm not sure again how much it's going to make a dent, but it's something to go forward on as well. Not always use the fossil fuels, different gases and stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
I think just to try to synthesize a few of the key points that I'm taking away here is important to be realistic, recognize that this is largely a driving community and probably will be for some time, that the farmland, the hedgerows, the agricultural and natural ecosystem component of the community is very important, and that's something that I think I heard from several of you as well. Thinking about it in this context, how does that play into target setting or what the role of the district is in reducing emissions? That demographically it may be challenging to for many folks to engage in active transportation or shift to active transportation, and but it sounds like there's still interest in exploring that as a way to nudge that transportation piece. And I think in the context of the CRD, there is CRD programs and funding, but locally the district is not directly financing that. That's not the role currently in providing direct support to households or enabling additional action that would could bring some of these household building emissions, for example. Okay. Is there anything, other key pieces that come to mind when you think of this target? These, this number in particular, trying to match the province, but wanting to balance that realism and sense of ambition.
Do you think that somebody threw this idea a few months ago about accounting for forests as carbon sinks? And sorry, forgive me if you've already done that in the inventory, but even how actions around, again, forest protection might go and be considered within our inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's probably more complicated than I'm thinking, but right now.
Yes, that is, I think, within the scope of some of the suggested actions or preliminary actions that we've identified, areas of action there. In talking with the CRD about that, it is not included in the total scope of emissions because it's something that's difficult to quantify. Currently they use, thank you very much. Currently the method they use is aerial photography and try to take squares and estimate what kind of land use that is, and based on that gauge a rough estimate of how much emissions are being sequestered in the overall district. Their methodology may change that would allow for more rigorous accounting, but that could be something potentially, if desired, that could be, Metchosin could advocate for with the CRD, and at least continue to push, investigate, and explore that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think another aspect of that is a important way to conserve existing emissions. If you want to reduce emissions further, that would require land use change to be able to either sequester more carbon by increasing forest cover or increasing grassland, or trying to think about that if there's opportunity to actually increase that. Otherwise, it's status quo, and you're preserving that. And that's an important role, as we saw from the numbers, but to achieve additional emissions reduction may be challenging. And then if you run into the challenge of a forest fire one day, then if you're factoring that in, then you have to consider that that would affect your emissions pretty significantly.
Yeah, then you have a big debt, I would imagine. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, my response is simply, if we're going to make this target based on what other levels of government are doing in terms of regulation, then it sits well with me. I think the issue for me is mirroring really what the mayor and what everybody has said, and Councillor Shugan's sort of starting off position. It's very difficult for us to imagine a lot of change at the moment, particularly on the transportation front. However, and I think you captured it in some of the priority actions there, it does seem to me to be sensible to be pushing for improved transit from the West Shore into town and back, so that the people who are going to town, they may find if we get that rapid bus going into a separate lane at the from the CRD level, well then it's actually faster to jump on that bus to get to town and back. So I'm not imagining people choosing that if it's terribly inconvenient at the moment, because they have other thoughts in their mind in terms of getting to work on time and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if we make it easier and easier, then I think the transportation targets can get better. It's just hard to imagine right now until those bus systems are fully in place and operational. So it's a kind of a carrot and stick issue.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that would be one of the areas that we can advocate for, and we've talked a little bit about that.
Thank you, Councillor Gray.
It's the moving from home to those situations. We promoted carpooling here years ago as a parking lot at the church where people can carpool in, but I don't know that it's used too much.
Mm-hmm.
But people can get all the way to Montefiore, then they're in fairly quickly if that rapid bus now exists. And if it gets better and better, well then there's a possibility there for those people going to town and back.
Great. Yes, I think you raised again the challenge that what is within the district's influence?
Mm-hmm.
What are you depending on other government actors to be able to implement to provide solutions? Especially this last mile challenge you're talking about, getting from your house to the bus stop, is a difficult one.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your feedback here. I do want to move us along, but if throughout this presentation, if anything piques your interest or if you have another idea following this workshop, please feel free to email me about particular components of this. I'll just step back here. We do want to go into some preliminary options for action. What does climate action look like for a more rural agricultural community? I'm just considering our timing now. So we did set aside a bit of time. Yes, I think what I'd like to do is present these, and then when we come back we can get into our activity where we have a more fulsome discussion about the particular options for action, if that sounds all right. We have about 15 minutes before our scheduled break. So this is an overarching, I think, set of lenses would be how you describe them for how we're thinking about what fits into these preliminary areas for action, and what are some of the factors that we're considering when deciding what goes in, and maybe what is an item or an action area to focus on, and then what is something to consider for the future. So current and future climate impacts. So what are the impacts that Metchosin is currently experiencing or can be expected to experience in more frequent or significant ways in the future? What are some best practices from rural and regional communities? What are, as I mentioned earlier, some lessons learned? What are some important opportunities that others have pursued that might fit within the district's areas of influence and other programmatic or policy work? What's within the scope of municipal jurisdiction influence? So what's actually possible within your realm of activities that can be funded, your resources of staff that are available, and I think importantly, which we'll get to as well, is within the knowledge and the capacity of the community to be able to support and advance as well. And then what do we know about residents' perspectives about climate change priorities as well? So we have some feedback from the online survey, which we'll talk about, and then also some emails that have come in that period as well. So I think starting with best practices from rural and regional communities, just highlighting a few areas, nature-based solutions has emerged as an area particularly for more agricultural and rural areas that are within kind of broader ecosystems, or and the ecosystem here in Metchosin is wonderful and diverse, and I think, as we've heard from councillors and members of the public, something that is important to climate action here. Partnerships and collaboration are particularly important. The smaller the size of the community, the more important that I think becomes, especially when you're looking to identify additional funding opportunities, and whether that be provincial funding, regional funding, federal funding. Are there partnerships? And I understand some partnerships are being pursued with neighboring First Nations as well. What are some potential collaborative projects that could be pursued with community organizations? That I think is another lens to consider. And then leveraging community resources. So as I mentioned, engaging community capacity. What is the capacity within the community to be able to act on climate change? How can individual action and household action be enabled through this climate plan? Thinking about some of the current and future impacts. So looking more generally at the regional impacts and some that have been highlighted as relevant and issues of concern. Climate hazards such as wildfire, whether it be direct, whether we're concerned about wildfire within or around Metchosin. Indirect, wildfire smoke has certainly come up, something many people have had experience with in recent years. Extreme heat events, again, a challenge that many have had experience with. Drought, water scarcity kind of connected to that as well, and then extreme rainfall events. So what are some of the climate impacts from that? Human health, when you talk about wildfire smoke, it has a range of health impacts. For example, people's capacity to recreate, particularly for those who are more vulnerable, older folks, infants or younger people, and people with respiratory challenges. How do these impact buildings and energy systems? So older buildings constructed for particular climate conditions still going to hold up in the way that they would otherwise if those hadn't shifted. Water supply and demand, food and agriculture. So is it changing the growing seasons? Is that changing what crops are more desirable or more, I guess, a better fit within the climatic zone? Ecosystems and species, how is it impacting the broader ecosystem within the district? And I think something worth noting here is this is largely drawn from the CRD climate projections, and other neighboring municipalities and other communities in general try and have pursued different forms of whether it be a climate risk assessment or hazard and vulnerability assessment to try to understand particular interactions between these climate hazards and the people, the resources, the infrastructure in their communities. And I think that's something that we'll be talking about when we talk about future actions as well, to get a clearer sense of what are the very specific impacts. In terms of residents' perspectives on climate priorities, the online survey had about 155 responses, plus additional emails and letters. I think just stepping back and framing the survey results, it is not a comprehensive and rigorous signal of exactly what the community wants. It's more taking the temperature of how do community members feel about particular areas of action from those groups who have responded. So just taking that into account, there are diverse community perspectives, and this reflects a portion of those perspectives. So respondents indicated in terms of their experience of climate events and concern about climate impacts, most have experienced extreme heat, drought, wildfire smoke, and extreme windstorms. Over 60% for all those noted that they had experienced those. About half of residents said that they were concerned or very concerned about climate change effects, but many, about 31%, were not at all concerned, which is not, that 31% not at all concerned may seem high, but it's not totally out of line with some national polls as well.
I find that number quite shocking, actually. Sorry, the 60% have experienced, extreme heat, drought, wildfire smoke, given that millions of people had that experience like 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Only 60%. Anyways, find that quite remarkable, but need to get that read. So
yeah, and again, this is a portion of perspectives in the community, and individuals' personal experience is very significant.
Absolutely.
And I think that depends on your particular circumstance too. If you live in a home that has a heat pump and air conditioning, and you may not experience it in the same way as someone who is maybe more vulnerable to some of these impacts, or it really stuck with them in a significant way.
Yeah.
Looking at some particular areas of concern with respect to community values. So just highlighting some of these survey results. Preserving Metchosin's rural character came out as something that 58% were concerned or very concerned about. Ensuring water supply, shared aquifer and septic disposal systems were protected and sufficient. Another one that many folks expressed concern or said they were very concerned about. Same with preserving forested areas and biodiverse ecosystems, and the preservation of agricultural lifestyles and resilient food systems. What types of action are most important for Metchosin to support? So thinking about what respondents felt was important for the district to pursue in terms of different types of actions. In the area of kind of forests and green spaces, promoting agricultural and food security was the biggest result that had, I guess, the largest number of important or very important responses. Expanding the Fire Smart program was one as well. And then reclaiming green space, managing invasive species, and planting native species was also noted as important. Homes, businesses, and other buildings. So supporting property owners to access information or resources related to renewable energy installations was another one. Enhanced energy efficiency, and encourage new construction or redevelopment to adhere to a net zero energy standard. And then when it comes to transportation, promoting local agriculture and food production was by far the most significant result there in terms of what people felt was important or very important. Advocating for better transit services, less so when it comes to what people said was important or very important, but still slightly or moderately important, that kind of gray zone in the middle there. And then advocating for improved cell phone coverage and internet connectivity, and safer and more accessible cycling and walking routes was another one.
Steve, what's the number on the cycling routes? I just didn't, it went by pretty quick there.
Yeah, 36% important or very important, and then 32% the other.
It's interesting how the 50% sort of concerned and very concerned still holds for most of the items, it seemed, and then striking that the transit and cycling are a little bit less.
Mm-hmm.
Just interesting.
Yes, and I think transportation as well, as we've heard, is an area that I think a lot of people see as challenging when it comes to taking climate action. And this is just highlighting some of the more significant results, and there were others that were lower than this as well. So I think, yeah.
The transportation conundrum, I guess.
Yeah. I think just to kind of touch base on what we're talking about in terms of residents, respondents' perspectives when it came to supporting climate action through taxation. So almost half supported a tax increase of at least $100, but most, 51%, said they were less supportive. 51% said they would, answer that less than $100 a household per year. And we had written comments that indicated we wish there was a $0 option, or that several respondents noted written opposition to any property tax increase. So felt that was important to mention here as well. Just want to pause here to ask if there are questions, comments, feedback on this summary of survey results that we have here.
Did people leave comments, like long comments? Were they typical for a survey like this, and were they helpful in any ways?
Mm-hmm. Short answer, yes and yes.
Okay.
When we get into the climate areas of action, or some of the opportunities for action that are selected, I can speak a bit about how the comments we received shaped those. We did receive a large number of comments. We had a survey of 155 people, and some of them, almost all of them, responded with a written response to some of those questions, which is relatively rare. So I think that indicates there is an interest, maybe from both sides, in this area. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, through the chair, I struggle with this because we've got 155 responses from a population of 5,067. So that's 3% of all of the people in Metchosin responded to this survey. So I'm not sure how valuable it is to assign percentages, and certainly from a scientific point of view, we would never do this. With an N of 155, if it's just a snapshot you're looking at, I guess those are the takeaways. But for instance, to have the media cover this in 51% is interested in this, or 49% is interested in this, I'm not sure how valuable that is for us going forward with our climate action plan. There were a number of flaws with the survey, and I think we should just remember that and move on and take these as snapshots, like you say, or bits of information rather than quantitative data that we can really assign credibility to. That's my worry here. I think one could argue how valid some of the percentages are in the conclusions.
Thank you, Mayor. I think reiterating what I'd said at the beginning, just this is intended to just be a high-level temperature check of a particular, as you mentioned, small proportion of the population. And 5,000, I'm not sure how many. I think that's also part of each of your roles as the delegated representative to take what you're hearing from community members and decide whether that makes sense to be able to, is this a strong signal or is this not a strong signal? And I think you're absolutely right. This is just a temperature check to give a high-level perspective of some of the considerations that we're taking into account as one of many lenses, as we saw, one of 4 different lenses that are influencing how we're thinking about this. There will be opportunity tonight to get additional public feedback, and as this moves through the approval process, additional opportunity there for people to weigh in.
I'm just struck, I agree with Mary Little. I'm struck though how it's a big number of people who are not at all concerned. That's a real important flag for me. Not determinative, just a flag. I would have thought, gee, people think like me. No, not so much. There's a group of people presumably represented in the 150 anyway who don't have that concern. So that's interesting and worth noting.
Other comments?
No, and that's what I would take away as well, is that there is a diversity of opinion out there, as much as we may not want to acknowledge it or find it disturbing, that there certainly is. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So just recognizing we're approaching our break here, I'm just going to, I think we've got one more subject area to cover. So the last lens here to think about is just what is within the scope of municipal jurisdiction and influence for Metchosin. So looking at what are potential actions that are regulatory or policy related that the district can and has the power to enact itself. What are district funded initiatives that it has the resources, the people, the human resources, or the funding to allocate through the budget? What are kind of more education awareness raising activities that it could do? What are externally funded initiatives that it could pursue or apply for? Partnerships, as we mentioned, regionally, provincially, federally, with First Nations partners or community organizations. And then what is more of an advocacy role, whether it be federal, provincial, at the CRD, with BC Transit, where are the opportunities to exercise influence, whether they be more firm, as if Metchosin has a vote and able to exercise advocacy in a direct way, or softer in terms of mayor and council lobbying and advocating for particular types of change with these organizations. So that leaves us with these 4 different lenses we're considering for our preliminary areas of action. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll get into what those look like, and we'll have a broader discussion about how some of those might fit, how they might be adjusted, or get some broader feedback on what could be included in this plan. So maybe break back in 5 minutes.
Thank you. That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. So we've kind of gone through the different lenses that we're using to think about our preliminary areas of action. And now I'm just going to take a few minutes to go through these areas, and then I'll pause at that point, and then we could go through either slide by slide, or if people have particular areas of action that have jumped out at them, we can get into those. So these are kind of the 9 broad areas of action that we've identified for the Climate Action Plan. On the mitigation side, we have advocating for improved resident access to climate action support. That could look a bunch of different ways, as we'll see when we get into some of those actions, but could be accessing CRD funding for household improvements to efficiency, could be accessing federal or provincial or regional funding pots for transportation, could be advocating for improved transit services, a variety of things there. Improving active transportation infrastructure was another one, and encouraging and enabling electric vehicle use. This one is interesting because, again, it's not very directly within the scope of the influence of the municipality, the district, but it is a broader change that is happening, and there are particular opportunities there. Preserve and protect forests, natural ecosystems, and agricultural lands. We've heard loud and clear that that's a key priority for the district, and I think that fits well within both the mitigation and the adaptation spheres of action. Increasing energy efficiency and climate resilience in buildings, so preparing the buildings throughout the district for the climate impacts that are being experienced and will be experienced increasingly or more significantly in the future, and then making those buildings more efficient and low carbon as well. And then 6, enhancing community engagement in climate action. As we mentioned, community is an important resource. There are organizations, there is knowledge, there is capacity to be able to take important action on both adaptation and mitigation. And I think enhancing how the community is engaged with is an important piece of this puzzle as well. Assessing and mapping climate hazards and vulnerability. As we noted, a lot of our understanding of climate impacts in the district is based on a more broader regional assessment, but there are particular interactions between climate hazards and the infrastructure in the district, the people in the district, the particular values of the district. So thinking about what that looks like and what that looks like geospatially as well could be an important area of action. Enhancing climate resilience of municipal assets and services. So thinking about what are the existing services and infrastructure that are provided by the municipality, what is the resilience of those to climate change or different types of climate impacts. And then reducing water consumption and improving water conservation was another area that there were signals that was an important area of action as well. Tying in with preservation of protected forests, natural ecosystems, and land, reducing water and water consumption, and protecting water is part and parcel with that as well. So looking through the next few slides, which will have a table of each of these action areas, just some discussion questions to think about. What actions do you think are most important to pursue from these? Which ones do you think are most urgent? And then what other opportunities for action do you think should be prioritized or could be prioritized? And then also just stepping back, thinking process-wise, most climate plans are strategy plans that have a list of actions, and all of those actions depend on what fits within the strategic priorities of any given council. So just because it's included as a priority, it will be up to council to determine how and when that is actioned. And then there may be actions that are a part of a longer, broader list that might not be prioritized now, but those priorities may shift as the circumstances change. So working backwards, mostly for the interest of focusing on adaptation-related actions and thinking about impacts. There are 3 different areas to touch on here. So when it comes to assessing climate hazards and vulnerability, some specific actions were investigate options to conduct a localized climate hazard and vulnerability assessment. This can look a number of different ways. Other neighboring jurisdictions have pursued this as a way to get a more localized understanding of the particular areas of climate vulnerability and the sensitivity of community resources and ecosystems, and then the adaptive capacity to respond to those that exist within the district or the municipality. Conducting an extreme heat and mapping exercise. This is something that has already been identified and is underway through work I understand with the fire department. So I think that is an important area of action to be able to understand extreme heat and what that means for the community. Enhancing climate resilience of municipal assets and services. So integrating climate change into any district asset management planning and policy development. Investigating opportunities to use natural asset management tools and approaches to manage climate impacts. This is an interesting area that's been pioneered in the last several years, and other municipalities, especially smaller municipalities, are beginning to explore. Reducing water consumption and improve water conservation is another one. Investigating opportunities to enhance groundwater conservation is a specific action that can look a number of different ways. Increasing rainwater harvesting, increasing the efficiency of irrigation practices, exerscaping or other approaches that reduce the need to water lawns or reduce water demand within the district. And then another specific action in that area would be investigate building, plumbing, code changes that could permit a gray water use or make it easier to use gray water where appropriate. So I'll just pause here. Feedback, comments, considerations for this slide and the areas of action, specific actions listed.
Steve, can I just ask, the very first one you mentioned, conducting a localized climate hazards and vulnerability assessment. The idea there is to identify locations in the district. We say, gee, that's a really difficult spot in terms of fire catching. Is that kind of thing?
Again, there are different methodologies you could use for a climate hazard and vulnerability assessment. And stepping back, there's also just a hazard vulnerability assessment exercise that many municipalities have done, not focused specifically on climate, but it's thinking more broadly about, is this actually a significant problem for a district? It may be a climate hazard that is broadly significant, but if it's not particularly relevant to the people of the district, to the infrastructure of the district, or if there happens to be particular capacity to deal with that impact, then it's probably not as significant. But if there is a particular impact on groups of people, particularly important infrastructure, if it could lead to kind of cascading events or overlap with other hazards in a way that would present compounding problems, then it would allow you to try to understand that and how you could try to mitigate those and where to focus your priorities, essentially.
Great, I think that answers my question. So the idea of, say, flooding, we've got the Bilston Creek running through the community, and there's some development of the headwaters. So that might be a climate hazard at the moment, given that an extreme rain event maybe hit that creek a little differently than it would have in the past. That's the kind of idea. Yeah. Thank you.
A question for Sue Lynn. Do we know, okay, so it's the extreme heat assessment and mapping that we've got the RFP out for. So that's probably
Starting in a couple of weeks.
okay. And will the results be known like by the end of the summer or?
I would imagine so.
Okay.
And so the fire chief is aware of the need to integrate that assessment mapping with our climate action plan. There has to be some kind of integration there.
Okay.
And I think that's an important exercise that speaks to that component of the hazard and vulnerability assessment, looking at extreme heat.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting over time to see what the risk of fire is. I mean, I was talking with somebody who has a forestry background, and he just pointed out that there's not a lot of history of widespread fire in this area, but the trend seems to be that that's possibly going to change over time. So, yeah, just understanding what the risk is and what the timing for that is, and yeah, so.
Other comments or considerations for this, or anything's jumping out as particularly important or urgent?
Just thinking about the asset management planning and policy development. Last night we had a meeting here in the council chambers, and someone mentioned the idea of focusing less on roadways, and what about the roadside trails, and what about bike lanes and that sort of thing. Is that what you're thinking of in terms of that kind of asset management planning? we'll maybe look forward to different ways of moving people about?
I
Or is
think-
this more to do with fire saving buildings and that sort of thing?
I think it's asset management in general, stepping back and looking at what are all of the properties, buildings, equipment owned by the municipality, and what is the services those enable, or how are those important to citizens. And then there's a distinct financial component of managing those well over time, which is largely its own realm and separate from climate change. But thinking about what are climate change considerations on asset management planning, frameworks, policies, strategies, and there is particular guidance on how to integrate climate change into that thinking and that work.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I've heard about that differently as well, how some assets won't last as long. So the asset management plan changes as a result.
Mm-hmm.
Councillor Ray. So if I can just chime in there, just a little bit about, it's still very, at the very early stage, is there's consideration being given to how do we account for natural assets. So it's still in its very preliminary stage, but definitely we're starting to talk about that as a tool of measurement. So long ways off though, from anywhere closer to be able to determine what that's worth and how do we actually determine that value.
That's great. Other feedback, comments, questions, or considerations on this slide before moving on?
Yeah, I've been giving this some thought based on conversations with one of the elders in our community, Bill Cave. The fire chief and I were talking the other day about buildings, and last year at the AVICC meeting in Victoria, we went on a site tour, and one of the components was looking at a model for a business called Unbuilders, and what they do is they take apart buildings, they recycle, they repurpose, and they're advocating for rather than complete tear down and then taking everything there to the dump, sort of a more finessed or more thoughtful process in building. And I've been thinking about that over the last year and thinking how we could implement some of those regulations, restrictions in our area. We don't have that many new builds. We have some, but I'm wondering if we can be visionary and thinking in the future what kind of changes we could make to our building practices here in Metchosin. It's an idea. Anyways, it's called, the group was called Unbuilders, and they've got a website, and it's sort of a neat organization. And it actually increases local capacity for job creation and preservation of natural sites, a lot of pluses, but it's expensive. It's expensive because rather than just taking everything to the dump, you recycle and repurpose.
Just to note that last year when we redid the salt shed, that we did pay a bit of extra money so that could be deconstructed and materials, as many as possible, were used or sold or at least kept without just being demolished.
Any other feedback on this slide before I move on? Anything to add?
Just wanted to question about the code changes to permit grey water reuse. That's now permitted, I think, in the BC code, or the building codes at the moment. Do we have to do something locally for that? Do you know?
I think other municipalities have made particular changes to building code or guidance that is available. So if it is something that is, my understanding is that it is helpful to provide additional information and update the community on how they can do that. And this could tie in with a more broader informational component of community engagement as well.
I like the sounds of that.
Yeah, I really like the grey water idea as well. you know, it's fine to talk about rainwater, but in the summer we just don't get very much. And, you know, a lot of that gray water could be used for watering gardens and in areas like that. But I really don't know anything about it. I don't know if we have experts in the community about the use of gray water, what kind of systems you have to have in place to use it.
Mm-hmm. There's a rainwater bylaw on the books in Metchosin currently, I understand.
Mayor Little?
Yeah, we've also got a local expert in the Highlands. Gord Barrett is very knowledgeable about water capture, water consumption, water preservation, and the use of filtration methods for grey water capture and usage. So we could, as a district, hold a workshop, a sponsored workshop for the, or workshops, plural, for citizens on how do you go about tackling that.
Great idea.
Great.
Gord's an enthusiastic promoter of the use of grey water, and he's done a lot of work on it, including, I think, getting codes changed.
Mm-hmm. It's an advocate. That's great. Other comments, questions, or feedback on the urgency or importance of some of these? All right. Okay. So this next slide, thinking more about buildings, also land use, agricultural and buildings, the overlap between some of these areas, energy efficiency and climate resilience. So this kind of low carbon opportunity between mitigation and adaptation. How can we make buildings more resilient to the impacts of climate change and also more efficient? So one area of action would be encouraging residents to undertake home energy audits and fire smart home ignition zone assessments, which is another informational piece and is an educational piece as well. And so I think that was identified as those two areas are particularly important, covering both those bases of efficiency and climate resilience. Developing a sustainability checklist as a high-level way to ensure that retrofits and any redevelopment are efficient and climate resilient, and just ensure that residents are thinking about that as they undertake maybe retrofits or redevelopment on the property. Promote the voluntary adoption of the BC Energy Step Code. Some jurisdictions have gone the step of making that mandatory. I understand there has been a back and forth between contractors over the years about whether that would be a good idea or not, but that was identified as an action, is promote the voluntary adoption of the Energy Step Code. And then also investigating local implementation of property assessed clean energy program, which is currently being reviewed provincially. And so monitoring that to see when that comes out, which is expected, I think, this year or early next year, whether that would be a good fit to advance in the district. And those PACE programs, property clean energy assessment programs, essentially allow residents to use the equity in their homes to finance clean energy generating equipment on their property. When it comes to enhancing community engagement in climate action, some specific actions would be to investigate new or expand existing opportunities for community education and engagement, such as you mentioned workshops on grey water use, for example. That would be an excellent opportunity. Controlling invasive and noxious weeds, coastal ecosystem sensitivity, I think, especially for landowners with property bordering the shoreline, and then low carbon, low impact farming practices. And those were some of the pieces of feedback we heard also from some of the data survey results. Those were areas of interest or opportunities for action. So pausing on this slide, anything jumping out at members of Mayor and Council here in terms of important actions, urgent actions, other questions or considerations on these?
I've only looked very briefly at the step code, so I don't fully understand how it works. Could you walk us through a little bit of that, Steve? Or, and again, what's the district's role in kind of pushing people to those standards, or I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think Carrie, my colleague, is more the expert in the step code. She helped to write the BC provincial documents on the sequential. It's essentially incremental advances in the level of efficiency of buildings. And this is something that, as we saw in that slide of the provincial, federal context, the broader code changes are happening over a longer timeline, but the step code is designed to provide an incremental approach that allows municipalities to accelerate that, essentially. And I can provide more information on the specifics of that, but it is something that municipalities, I think Highlands is one example that has kind of taken the step of making that mandatory.
Okay.
And Saanich?
And Saanich.
I think tonight maybe there's a big meeting in Saanich to discuss this, and we received an email from a contract organization, or perhaps it was the natural gas group, saying they prefer not go all electric, give us a chance to keep providing natural gas. So that's that issue that when you get on the step code, eventually it's electric, but we're not there yet. We're back before that. And so the idea is as time moves forward, I guess everything will be electric, but a district can decide to impose or make mandatory a step higher than the province has moved to just yet. I think that's where that is. I sort of think of we don't have a whole lot of building going on, and this might be a relatively low impact but a relatively high cost for us to take on to force the step code on the few buildings that are left to be built in Metchosin. On the other hand, I don't know enough about it either. I'm at that early stage of trying to understand what that is. Some of the other ones, though, like the home energy audits, we certainly can promote that. We're active in the Fire Smart campaign through the fire department, which I think is very positive and important vis-a-vis reducing the fire risks. The sustainability checklist seems to be something that part of this might be, and I don't know if our building inspector knows about these things yet, but if not, he could become involved in that and sort of thing. Oh, there's Susan's got her hand up.
Just a comment that the report and step code is going to be coming from council first.
Excellent.
Great.
Yeah, and I remember when we were looking at building our home and just some of the early reading I did, how if you want to get to that higher level, you're gonna end up paying quite a bit, say for triple pane windows or not even so much heat pump, but that's sort of almost sort of standard now. But again, how much you pay to get to that extra 10% is quite significant. So the person writing this article was advocating for a pretty good home. That's probably the best bridge between the economics you have personally and what you can do in terms of a comfortable home that will withstand, be climate resilient and all that. So I think that I'm kind of trying to understand what the role of the district might be.
Yeah.
And Allison's got her hand up, but she's not allowed to talk, is she? She's got to say.
Jump in, Allison. What would you like to say?
I could arrange for a presentation from the South Island Climate Action Network. They've presented successfully to several municipalities in the CRD, and they are usually accompanied by physicians for, Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Well researched presentation, if you're interested.
Thanks, Allison. Maybe we can tee that up when we hear about the step code from staff.
May 9th, right?
We haven't arranged it here. It's been in other municipalities.
We're busy May 9th. We're busy May 9th.
We couldn't do it by May 9th.
The other issue is control of noxious and invasive weeds. There's quite a bit of action on that in Metchosin at the moment. Some people in the audience here have been busy with that. And the coastal ecosystem sensitivity, we're hoping to, within a shoreline plan, we've got booked in for next year. The low carbon, low impact farming, we're hoping to launch an agricultural plan soon, and I'm hoping that'll be climate focused. I wondered about a couple of other ones there. I have no idea if people are interested, if it makes sense for us, but a community compost. Those kinds of ideas. We'd be more to test to the community and ask if people thought it was a worthwhile thing. We have this pod system, which is a very interesting community organization or basis for organization in a community that I think it'll be interesting to share the community action plan with people generally about different ideas that may come up in terms of how some neighborhoods might like to organize. It's an emergency-based system at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
although it's in its infancy. It was about community coming together in different ways, and it's kind of gone into the emergency area, so it makes sense in terms of the adaptation end of things. It's very particular and depends on community, the local pod, what they may or may not like to do.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I would just throw in a word about invasive species as well. And I think there's two things around that. It's or three probably. Number one, fire risk. Number two, the protection of forests, because what happens when you have an infestation of broom or holly is it actually changes the composition of the soil and makes it more difficult for other species to come up. And the third one, I forget. It's those two things. Yeah. And yeah, we have a great group out there who are doing work. Unfortunately, they're still stopped from getting into the CRD because of archaeological concerns. It'd be neat to take that up further. Yeah, and again, understanding what the role of the district is in encouraging that, but people know that they have the potential of minimizing the intensity of it, removing invasives as a step for fire. That might be kind of a motivation for folks.
Thank you. Okay. Other comments? Feedback on the importance or urgency of some of these actions? I think noting just on this the step code considerations and the balance of the cost and benefit, how much bang for your buck are you going to get taking particular areas of action or particular courses of action. One key step that's often discussed is just encouraging adoption of heat pumps as broadly as possible, because that has the energy efficient component, and then if you're dealing with extreme heat, that can provide a cooling capacity that many homes, especially older homes, just don't have. The findings of the extreme heat assessment, I think, will give some clarity as to the importance of that when it comes to indoor air temperature in particular areas of the district, but just wanted to flag that particular area of action has been fruitful in some places.
Sherry, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just think, I mentioned electric cars before, but I mean, to me, one of the biggest barriers to try to make your home energy efficient or have an electric vehicle is cost. I mean, I know there are rebates out there, but there's still considerable cost to implementing any of those kind of things. And I know for some of us anyway, that initial cost is simply prohibitive, which is quite frustrating. So, whether there's ever, pressure on the government for, loans that could be deferred like taxes or something along those lines. But I mean, it's great if you can do it, but like even heat pump, they're expensive.
Yeah. And I think that gets into what is the sphere of influence in Metchosin. Some districts have added, or municipalities have added a top-up for things like heat pumps in addition to provincial incentives, but just recognizing the limited financial capacity of this district to provide support did not include that as a concrete action there.
Very little.
Yeah, we actually have an expert in the audience regarding solar panels. So when we are considering rebuilding structures, maybe fire hall or whatever, I would be interested in more information on whether it would be worth our effort in the long run, in the long term, to apply panels, solar panels that we, as a district, I understand that we many years ago, 7 years ago or so, we supported the application of solar panels to the barn, the museum barn, the Pioneer Museum. I'm not exactly sure why that was chosen as the building to be our representative for solar panels, but anyways, that was a district-sponsored and community-sponsored free labor went into that, and a lot was done at cost. And so maybe that's what we also need to think about when we're rebuilding, that we need to put that kind of infrastructure in.
Yeah, terrific idea. We've got a feasibility study coming on our new fire hall, and that could be part of that effort to sort out how's it going to be heated, what kind of electrical systems are appropriate, solar panels. all
Yeah,
of
because
that.
those prices have come down, right?
Yeah.
I'm speaking out of turn. This isn't my area of expertise, but I understand from Rick Perron that the panels are about $1,000 each. Maybe you could ask him.
Oh, well, I think it is something that would be worthwhile pursuing the feasibility study. I mean, right, Rick?
Right. Do that on holidays.
That's great. And I think we'll see what the province's what the province comes out with in terms of its PACE energy program. But if there's eligibility for municipalities to leverage their own equity in their existing assets, then how does that opportunity shift that? And how does that play into municipalities' broader asset management planning too? Great. Okay. This is excellent context here. Other.
Just want to be sure to turn that microphone on. There.
Is that on?
I think it's on now.
Okay. Other thoughts, feedback, considerations about the relative importance or urgency of some of these actions? Anything else on this slide?
Well, I think the ultimate question for us is what can we do as a district? And some of these I'm struggling with. Again, the step code, I mean, there is potentially a role for us there. What is it? I'm not totally clear yet. With invasive species, that's an easier one. I mean, we can set up work to promote that, support the groups who are out there doing it. But yeah, some of these, and again, what's our role in the low carbon, low impact farming practices? I mean, part of it is the farm plan, I suppose. So yeah. Yeah, so I'm just trying to think about what's our role in all of these things.
Yeah, and that was one of the lenses we tried to apply to think about identifying priorities that are maybe more within the sphere of influence and more realistic for the district, like encouraging residents to undertake home energy audits and fire smart home condition zone assessments, recognizing that this is, the fire smart work is something the fire department's already been doing. There's momentum maybe in some of these areas already. And then what are some other opportunities to be able to get people thinking about the efficiency of their homes or the climate resilience of their homes?
The other thing that I wonder about is what is the best way of spreading good ideas and good practices? Because I often wonder if, promotional material from the district does anything, or local governments for that matter. Whereas if you're talking with somebody and they say, oh, I'm 68 years old and I ride a bike, well, what's your problem? It's like, oh, okay. Anyways, I mean, or somebody exposes you to the electric bike they have, or they mentioned they're picking invasives in a park or whatever. So that, I think that word of mouth is really can be quite powerful. So even doing something like we're doing right now, I think can have an effect. So, yeah.
Good point. We've got a couple of points over here.
Oh, I just wanted to add that the district has also been involved with the CRD's Home Energy Navigator program in the educational capacity, so helping promote basically a concierge service that you can access through the CRD, and they walk you through the different grants that are available, things that you might be eligible as a homeowner to access in order to support energy efficiency upgrades in your property. So looking at the whole gamut of what you could potentially do as a homeowner. So that's something that we're supporting as a member municipality of the CRD. And I think that we're just helping promote that. So we're taking along with work that's being done in the region.
Yeah, and leveraging those regional resources is critical for this district. Yeah.
I think too, as I mentioned, if the staff that we have are aware of some of these things, then it's just a little bit more than the pamphlet. It's, oh, did you know? I can imagine Nick, who's our building inspector, would be familiar with, well, he'll know the step code issues probably relatively well, but the notion of there's an opportunity if you want to go further with your plan, that kind of thing. Your building plan, I mean, in a particular individual situation. So people may not follow it, but at least they're hitting somebody who might know a little bit more about it and be able to give us some counsel or opportunity or options. But it's a really good point about how do you do things. I see the not exactly advertisements in the Muse, but those little pieces by the CRD that go in, I think, pretty regularly, if not every issue, with some promotion of regional activities or ideas.
Thanks, just capturing some of that. Yes, I think it would be interesting to, and I'm not sure if the CRD makes this data available, but understand what the uptake has been on some of these programs and how that compares to other districts. Granted that, there's not as much opportunity to access these incentives when there's a lot less building, right? So taking that into account, what does that look like? And just having some of that additional data, if it is available from CRD, might be helpful to inform where there's opportunity to dig into some of these education awareness raising initiatives and what is maybe already there's significant uptake already. Okay. We okay to move on to the next slide? Other feedback on this slide for now? Good. Okay. So this one, a number of specific actions are listed here, just recognizing the significance of preserving and protecting forest, natural ecosystems, and agricultural lands to many of the conversations we've had leading up to this meeting, some of the written feedback from the survey, and previous engagement with Mayor and Council in our previous workshop as well. So some of the specific actions I've identified here are investigate development of forest and ecosystem conservation land use targets. So is this something that is of interest to the district? Is this something that had been previously explored? In some of my research, it looked like there had been some wonderful work looking into conservation strategies and actions and opportunities. There's a history of momentum and progress in this area, but is this something that is of interest? I'm not sure, but it could be a way of focusing efforts and evaluation on what is important to the people of the district. So that's one that was identified as something to investigate. Engage with partners to identify and solicit external funding for new habitat protection and restoration projects. Sounds like that's something that has been also undertaken with some success in the past. And there may be opportunities on the table right now or things under consideration or opportunities that emerge in the future. But where are those potential partnerships? What do they look like? And is that of interest? Leveraging land acquisition funding to purchase and convert additional district lands into designated parkland. That was also something that was identified. And I think both of these last two activities move from just preserving the existing ecosystems and parkland and habitats to expanding that as well, which has, I think, value in and of itself, but also can have value in terms of carbon reductions and sequestration. Lobbying senior and regional governments for improved land protection and ecological preservation, for example, via the CRD or with federal or provincial government agencies that own land or governments that own crown land within the district. And I understand there has been some shifts around that in recent years as well. Investigate opportunities to encourage wetland restoration. Support partner efforts to enhance agricultural land preservation and continue efforts to develop a municipal agricultural plan. Noting that came up as well, that's something that's already underway and in the works, and that there seems to be significant momentum on or interest. So that rounds out the specific actions that we've identified for this area of action. Feedback, thoughts on importance, urgency, other comments or questions on these?
Just the third last bullet, you know, in terms of like just that terminology, wetland, I almost think it should be wetland/riparian. Creek restoration protection is becoming a bigger thing within Metchosin right now. So, and yeah, there are numerous efforts underway to address that.
Great.
We have actually also talked about what the heck is it? The very first one, I think.
Conservation.
Sorry,
language.
maybe it's a second bullet or a combination of the two.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that they'll be more discussed as we go along.
Other questions, comments, or?
Yeah, I'm interested in all of these. I think the top two are critical in terms of moving from just seeing land and saying, well, that's nice, it's that way, but actually moving to covenant land and protect it in different ways, whether with partners or, well, primarily partners with the district. But I think these are both good ideas that we should get onto. And then we don't have a huge amount of district lands, but there are some district lands that can be, there's some discussion with the Parks and Trails Committee about particular lands we own and their use for parkland funding. I'm not really clear right now what the CRD is doing. I know there was a change in how they were collecting funds for parkland acquisition, and they changed the formulas last year, I think. But I believe that remains important for us as time goes forward. Maybe it's not the next item that we can do, but something that's worth carrying on and discussing. And or if we're able ourselves to, in the process of saving land here, involve the CRD where appropriate, makes sense to me. And then Jay's spoken well about the riparian, and I'm thinking of Bilston Creek and Beach Creek and other sites. And then the agriculture plan, I think, is a really exciting opportunity here where we could be pushing regenerative agriculture, or at least talking about it. What the big role of the district is, I'm not sure, but maintaining agricultural land, we certainly have a big role in that way. And the Agriculture Advisory Committee's been talking to us about that issue of making sure that as development occurs or houses are built, how they're built and how that works. And then our interest in local food security sort of comes under that one too, I think. I don't know that we get to food security next year, but the idea that we're at least moving in that direction, providing opportunities for people to buy local, grow local and also buy local. So this particular page is a big interest to me in terms of priority preparation and whatever actions the district can take.
Thank you.
So I think all of these, I think everybody probably at the table also agrees that all of these are important initiatives. What struck me with one of your other slides was the slide with the arrow and the advocacy with the policies at the bottom and the advocacy to senior levels of government. And I think if we advocate to senior levels of government and say you must protect this, and you must preserve this ecological site or protect our seas, we also have to walk the talk in Metchosin in terms of a very easy one is a tree preservation bylaw. We need to move on that so that we are actually making, that's what we can do at this table is policy driven. Those are the kinds of things I think that will be very impactful. Not uniformly accepted in Metchosin, but I think that would be one of the things we can do. But we need to give out a consistent message to the senior levels of government, because they will turn it around and bite us if we're asking for funding or asking for protection, and they mentioned that, but you're not doing it, right? So I just think we need to have a consistent message as we advocate for mitigation, mitigation for the effects of climate change. So all of these on this page are a great idea. It has to be coupled with our own policies, bylaws.
One, I just throw this out to folks here. So second last bullet, support partner efforts to enhance agricultural land preservation and utilization. Because it's one thing to preserve the land, but that doesn't necessarily mean you use it to grow food. And there's been varying degrees of discussion about what that might look from bringing in young growers to, I don't know, changing, to diversifying from hay fields or whatnot. So somebody mentioned to me ostriches the other day, but
Don't put your head in the sand.
anyways, I wonder if utilization might go
More
in there.
specific. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any thoughts on that in particular, or other feedback?
It is something that we have actually, just about every one of those bullets there, we have been doing at some point in time through the years, and I think we're just bringing it more and more forward. So I think Metchosin actually has done very well at taking the lead on a lot of these. But to what Jay was saying, just even at the recent convention, I sat in on a session of the young agrarians, and we talked about that here locally. And while I was there, actually, one of our young people, well, she's younger than me, she's probably 40, she, much younger than me, had texted me and said, hey, what do you know about young agrarians? And, you know, they're looking for somebody to take the lead. And I'm like, I'm just sitting in a session right now. So there's interest in that. There's quite a process of actually going about doing land matching, especially as we do have people who do own various sizes of land. So that is an option as well to explore. I know there's been some criticism for the mass amounts of hay fields we have, but what people need to also realize that is food for the sheep that they love seeing graze on those fields. As well as there's various different crops that are being grown, and they're not just hay, there's different cover crops. So there's, energy going back into the soil amendments and various kinds of feeds and forages and stuff like that. So there's an interesting clutch of farmers that are actually exploring some options of how they use their lands as well. So it's, they're quietly progressing along. It's quite fascinating to work with them.
Thank you. Other thoughts, feedback, comments, or feedback on the urgency or importance of some of these jump out to you?
Well, I think the tops that are kind of urgent in terms of making sure this land is preserved and protected as we're able when opportunities arise. So I think this is probably where as Councillor Donaldson said, we've been active, but it's saying that vision and direction and saying, well, that's where we want the direction we want the community to go, and then people don't. It feels like normal to make a move to say covenant of parts of the property to make sure it's protected into the future.
And we have been doing that as well. I mean, TLC and HAT have both been proactive in approaching neighbors and getting the information out there. We just saw recently, I think there was a resident that actually approached us. I want to put a covenant on my property. So more and more, the information is getting out there, and I think, we keep bringing this forward as we have been doing and championing climate action. It's becoming more acceptable and more the norm, not so obscure. It definitely is more reachable, with the exception of like what Councillor Epp says with the costs of certain things. I know in our household, certain things like that are just not cost effective, but just the style of the house.
Yeah.
Tree cover does far better than
Single pair
air
windows.
almost.
Thank you. Any other comments on this slide before moving on to our last one? Okay. So this is shifting towards more firmly into the mitigation side, looking at advocating for and improving residents' access to household climate action support. So increasing awareness of and promoting participation in the CRD's regional home retrofit and fuel switching program. As Catherine mentioned, there's already work underway to feed into and make sure residents are aware of the online navigator platform that lists all the incentives that residents are eligible for. So that's great. Yeah, and as I noted earlier, maybe getting a sense of what the uptake has been could help determine if this is a useful way to expend resources or energy towards. Continuing to lobby BC Transit to further improve transit scheduling and bike-to-transit connectivity was one area we heard of in our last workshop. Heard some feedback that this had been going on for ages, and lobbying BC Transit can be challenging, but there have been improvements that have been made, even incremental ones. I just had a conversation today about the bus service at the school, the schedule being slightly adjusted to align with class times, so students getting out have a better chance of catching that bus. Not quite as good as it could be maybe, but that's incremental progress. And then rapid bus service, some of those changes that have happened regionally are a start as well. So just noting that, as we've talked about, I think in a few different fronts, that's a tough nut to crack, transportation, but improved bus and transit services is an important piece of that. Advocating at CRD for enhanced recognition of carbon sequestration in the greenhouse gas inventory. So is this something that is worth exploring? Maybe it's just investigating what that looks like, getting a better sense of what that might mean. Is this in the district's interest to do this? It's not identified as a priority here, but through conversations and also just recognizing the importance of ecosystems, forests, and agriculture to this community, maybe this is something that could be worth exploring. Improving active transportation infrastructure was another one that was identified here, and the specific action there is investigating options to enhance active transportation planning and investment. For example, an active transportation strategy. It sounds like there's a broader transportation strategy that's maybe being explored or investigated. I think noting that in some communities there are funding channels to be able to access active transportation infrastructure that require there to be some preliminary assessment or planning done. So that's kind of a hurdle that's there, that once you get past it, then you have access to new funding opportunities that allow you to actually build some of this infrastructure. But having the strategy or a set of priorities in place is often required to access some of those pots of money. Also noting that some of those funding pots are only eligible through particular organizations like the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which I understand Metchosin was previously a member of, is not currently, but just considering the cost benefits of that, it's not free to be a member of those organizations, but is there a possibility that it could lead to more money coming in over the long term? Something to consider. Encourage and enable electric vehicle use. Developing EV charging station service and maintenance plan, just noting that there are a couple public chargers in the community, but they have not been operational or not consistently operational. It sounds like there have been some conversations to maybe get those going again. Just figuring out, it could be something that is quite simple, that someone else takes ownership of it, they're using it as a pay to charge service, and then it's up and running and they're managing that. But what is the jurisdiction's, or what is the district's role in keeping those running? Basically just figuring out who's doing what, how can that be allocated in an efficient way. Identifying and applying for external funds to purchase and install additional public EV charging stations. So there's the public side of it, so how many additional charging stations are needed, what is valuable, what is useful. I think one topic that came up is the importance of this district as a refuge for other neighboring districts to come to be able to access nature, to appreciate the value of what this district has to offer, and that preservation has a broader regional impact as well, recognizing the importance of that. If that can be enabled for more people to access this using clean energy, is that a useful opportunity to explore? And that transition, it may happen on its own, but I think there are ways that the district can consider nudging it, as other municipalities and districts have done as well. And then the other I guess, dimension of that is private charging stations and commercial charging stations that people have at their businesses, on their buildings, in their homes. Again, there is a significant barrier to purchasing an electric vehicle. Will that shift significantly as the used electric vehicle market grows and changes? There is a provincial mandate, I think a federal mandate as well, to ensure that no new combustion engine vehicles are sold after 2035. So there is a timeline here, and it's expected that will change pretty dramatically over the next 5-10 years. So what that looks like, we'll see, but just this should be something that is on the district's radar to some degree and can determine its role through actions such as those suggested. Thoughts, feedback on these areas of action and specific actions?
Yeah, so we have talked about the EV charging stations for about 3 years, I think, and in 2019, I think they were decommissioned, and with promises, and I think that would be an easy thing for us to move on. I'm not sure why it hasn't happened, but not only does it provide energy for cars, people come out here and enjoy our beaches and our space just like we enjoy the doctors' clinics and the pharmacies and the shopping centres in Colwood and Langford. But what is great about a EV charging station is it at least keeps people here for a while, so that they spend their money at the local farmers' stands or at the cafe or businesses here. And so I think it's wonderful that we welcome everybody from the region to enjoy our natural spaces, but I would also like to have them enjoy our farm stands too, and our local businesses, so we can capture some of that capital. And one of the ways is through an EV charger. And sometimes we've talked about this before with the transportation plan. In order to get OPMs or other people's money, you have to spend some on transportation plans and agricultural plans to leverage those to get access to other money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just the fact that we don't have an operating EV charger in the core is I think a big oversight and something we should look at. And I'd be curious to know what the economics are. If we can just ask one of the private suppliers to come in. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of the past councillors was working on that, and I know there's been different grants and stuff. The ones we had, we were, I believe, even picking up the bill for, or I think even the community house was at some point, weren't they?
Community house was, yeah.
Yeah, for that one. I'm not sure about the one over near the cafe, but they're a little outdated now, and I think now you hear about fast charging and stuff like that. So obviously the technology's changed.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly something that I know this council has kind of talked a little bit about, not in great depth, but I'm not sure where we're at with
Yeah,
that.
we were supposed to be changing them over to user pay ones, and
Yes.
it just, whoever was looking after it just kind of dropped the ball. So, but I think Steve has been on it.
Oh, great.
Yeah, a little bit of what's happening was that the previous council was thinking about what money the district would get for it, rather than just simply going private. And that's complicated the discussion a little bit. But I don't see why it can't proceed. It's just a question of dedicating the time to get that done. And then I was thinking about the fast chargers, but now Mary Little's got me thinking about slow chargers. Keep people around. Just kidding.
Not too charged, not too slow. I mean, you need to make it worth their while, but
We want a quick turnover of visitors.
That's right. We'll have different ones depending on where they're situated.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, there are those two charges. It'd be nice to get them active, and I can work on that
Yeah.
with the staff. I think that we do have an active transportation plan pending. With that idea is there to move forward with that. And some of our challenges will be, the notion of things like bike lanes, but how safe are they? Are roads people travel fairly quickly versus roadside trails, and then the finances and that kind of thing. But getting a plan in place sounds like the first step, and then go from there, and that'll be kind of a cool thing to lay out and see where we go. I think advocating at the CRD for enhanced recognition of carbon sequestration, I'm part of a group we've only had, I guess, one meeting at the CRD level. I think it's a quarterly meeting around climate, but I can certainly go to that meeting and talk about that and see what interest there is at the CRD. Interest maybe is not the right word. What uptake there might be on that question.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a worthwhile one because it's part of how we see ourselves here, many of us do, and so let's see whether or not that interest is there. That would help build the notion of the regional growth strategy being limited, that we're not within it, that kind of thing. So it would be a buttressing of our other desire to be a green community. I think, as you pointed out, continuing to be in the game with BC Transit and the CRD around transportation policies makes sense. And then the kind of as it comes to us. And then the Navigator program, something we're involved in. So all of these seem like reasonable things to do. The question, I guess, in the end is, with so many of maybe all the things that we talked about, we've got high impact, low cost, or high impact, high cost, low impact, low cost, low impact, high cost, and sorting out where to put our energies. I mean, cost in the general term of staff resources and then also financial resources.
Yeah. And those dynamics may shift over time, new funding announcements,
Yes.
changes in provincial or federal policy, regional incentive programs. Having, I think, a plan that includes a range of potential action areas allows you to be a bit nimble and taking advantage of the changing landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And technological change as well, and how that changes people's behavior. This aspect around charging and the changing. It's not just people filling up on gas; they're there for a period of time. So how can you leverage that to the advantage of the community and put the best foot forward to be able to do that?
People are going to bring up metal for a metal recycling bin while they're charging.
Our metal bin is very famous.
It is.
It's quality. Well
They're
used.
usually trucks and not usually electric.
Yes.
A lot of trucks.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think it would be worth the discussion with BC Transit as to where bus service may be in that bike to bus connectivity. And I suspect they would have a sense of, again, the economics of it, what the potential ridership could be, how many riders they would have to open things up. But we need to, and especially in connection with an active transportation plan, possibly. So even if it's the ability to ride out Metchosin Road, which is, you can do it, of course, but taking your life in your hand with a narrow shoulder, to Royal Bay, where bikes and bus service may be more accessible. So
The problem with Royal Bay is, what they told me anyway, was that they're having an exchange there, but they're not having a park and ride, which is really unfortunate, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's similar in Loxton as well. There's going to be an exchange there.
And that would be such a great spot to have a park and ride because of the goose and.
Yes. They just need to take more bikes on instead of just two on the bus.
And the way, like downtown, I think it's downtown, where they've got that bike lockup area, which would be great to have at park and ride areas.
That's true.
Yeah. Some specific issues were raised too as well. The number of bikes you could fit on a bus, but also just not knowing if you'll have that space when you go, right? You might bike there and then both spots are taken for a bicycle, then you're in a tough position.
Yeah.
Okay. Other comments, feedback on these areas of action or specific actions here? And just noting we're right at 4 o'clock here. We're just wrapping up.
Okay.
Well, the one thing that is interesting from our side of planning is we've taken some steps to go through a strategic plan exercise, which we've been underway with since December, November or something. So there'll be more on that I think, on Monday, but we're going to do another iteration later this year. And so I think so much of this is good material, that we can feed into that. So
Yeah. I think I'll mention that when we wrap up, just in terms of process. But as I noted at the beginning, this plan is intended to present some specific areas of action and opportunities that you can seize on based on your strategic priorities and how those fit within those and how those evolve over the course of your mandate and future mandates. And the plan itself can be updated to evolve with those changes and changing circumstances regionally and technologically, and just to our understanding of the impacts in the region as well, in the district.
It seems to me the plan too will change over time, just because the climate's going to be changing, and the nature of what extreme events and how common they are, and also just the general drift of temperatures and weather. And so I guess there'll be new things will be coming up, and we'll need to be adjusting as we go. It's kind of a starting place.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
So just to conclude, thank you very much for taking the time to review this information, to provide some of your thoughts and feedback, provide some additional context about what this means for you and your constituents, some of the particular areas of action, and thinking about what these priorities might look like. I'll take this feedback and additional feedback received at the MEASC meeting this evening. We'll be putting together a draft climate action plan targeting early June, and then a presentation of that draft to council at the planning committee, I understand, targeting June 8th. To be confirmed. We'll take that feedback. So that will be an opportunity to review critically where we've landed in terms of those priority action areas and specific opportunities, how that fits in the current situation, in the current context. And then also, as we discussed, this is a first step on what will be a long journey to adapt to the climate changes the district is experiencing now and will experience in the future, and evolve with the broader mitigation policy context that's happening federally, provincially, regionally. So we'll integrate the feedback received from that meeting, we'll finalize the CAP, and my colleagues and I will submit that to council for final review and approval at some point. Also, I have it June to be confirmed, but we'll take it from there. Questions, comments on these next steps? Any other feedback there? Okay. Well, thanks very much for your time today. Appreciate it. This is always love coming to council chambers, and it's very beautiful and wonderful to see so many people here, and this beautiful scene behind us here. So thank you for your time.
Thanks so much for coming. Much appreciated for your work and efforts and the meeting today.
Thanks.
So maybe with that, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So
Okay, all in favor? Thanks so much. Much appreciated.
hey, don't forget to visit the metal bin.
I think I have to